Hey everyone, it's Amy from thecrazycraftlady.com. Today I'm going to share with you two brand new Christmas crafts as well as kind of a mini tour of my Christmas living room and my mantle. I made these two crafts specifically for my mantle this year. My trees are pretty much the same as last year. Yes, trees. I display 3 trees in the corner of my living room. They're kind of tall pencil trees, so it works. And then I decided to change things up a little bit with adding a few new crafts for my mantle. I really hope you enjoy them. Let's get making. All right, first up, we're gonna make a rag garland using a string of lights. So you wanna use a shorter string of lights. This is 50 lights and it's like 11 feet long or something. You can do it longer, you just need to buy more fabric. But for this, I used 1 yard of flannel fabric. So I bought 3 different patterns. So a 1/4 yard of 2 and then a 1/2 yard of another one. I feel like for this type of garland, the ideal size of each cut of fabric is about 10 inches by 2 inches. So a lot of times if you ask for a 1/4 yard at the fabric store, they'll give you like a 10-inch cut, which is perfect. And then you just have to cut it into 2-inch strips. So it's super easy. So you can use, like I said, I'm using 3 different fabrics. So I've got a 1/2 yard or a little more than a 1/2 yard of the black and white one. And then I'm using a 1/4 yard of the other 2 green and white patterns. If you wanted to do 4 different patterns, you could. I just had a hard time finding flannel fabric that was just green and white in neutral colors that didn't have red in it. So I just went with the 3 different patterns just because I don't do red at Christmas time, in case you haven't noticed. Like, I'm all about the neutrals. Maybe someday that'll change, but right now I'm really into the green and the black and the white. So I just kind of cut everything down into 2-inch strips until I had, my stack of flannel fabric. And like I said, if you take a 10-inch cut of fabric and you cut it into 2-inch strips and you do that 4 times, you'll have enough to cover a 50 light little string of Christmas lights. And then just get tying. So pull your light string out of the box, unwrap it, and kind of pull it apart to stretch it apart, because those Christmas lights, when you first pull them out of the box, they're all kind of scrunched up together. So try to separate everything. And then I'm going to just talk you through the pattern that I did, because I had twice as many of the black and white than I did the green and white fabric. You have to do like an alternating pattern and alternating the number of ties you do between each light. So I did black, then 1 green, and then black, and then a different green, and back and forth and back and forth. And I also alternated between each light. So in that first one, I did 1 tie, and then in the space between the next 2 lights, I'm going to do 2 ties. And because this flannel that I found did not have a pattern on both sides, I folded the piece of flannel into thirds and then I tied it on. And this way you only have like the good side of the fabric facing up. So in that next section, I'm going to tie 2 pieces of fabric. And then in the section after that, I'm going to tie 1 piece of fabric, and back and forth, following the same pattern of black and white, then green, and then black and white, and then the other green, and so on and so forth. So I'm folding this into thirds here, and then I'm just going to tie it in a simple knot onto my little light string between my lights. The other thing to bear in mind is after you fold that fabric into thirds, as you're tying the knot, try to make sure that the quote good side of the fabric is facing up, and that'll save you a lot of headache. So like I said, if you have 50 lights here and you have 4 10-inch cuts of flannel fabric that are cut into 2-inch strips, you will have almost exactly enough pieces of fabric to cover your string light if you alternate 2 ties and then 1. 2 and 1, 2 and 1, back and forth between each light, in the space between each light. If you do it that way, you'll have just enough fabric. And I think it's also kind of the right ratio of fabric to lights, using about a yard of fabric for about 50 lights. That's just my personal preference, but you can do it however you want. So this is just going to speed up and repeat the process all the way through. This is a great podcast or Netflix craft project, and it actually came together quite quickly. And then when you reach the end, I want to say I had like 2 or 3 leftover pieces of fabric, and I just tied those onto the very end so that end piece of the plug was covered. So that's my little light up rag garland. And I love using the flannel fabric on this winter craft because it's so much more cozy. Okay, next up, we're gonna make little Christmas trees out of cardboard and yarn. So I've seen this done with styrofoam tree forms, but I'm not an environmentalist, but I am kind of off the styrofoam bandwagon. I'm not gonna buy styrofoam for a craft. It just seems a little silly when I have leftover cardboard lying around that I can upcycle. So this is just scrap cardboard from a box or package that was delivered to our house, and I'm just cutting triangles. So to give these trees a little bit more 3 dimensions so they're not totally flat, I ended up layering like 3 or 4 triangles on top of each other. So just kind of cut each triangle like one after the other, a little bit smaller than the one before it. And then grab hot glue, just a tiny bit of hot glue, and kind of hot glue the stack together. So once you have your tree form ready to go, it's time to add a stem. So for this, I just use little wooden dowels, and you can use your heavy-duty crafting scissors to cut them down to length. I like the idea of using various lengths of dowels and various sizes of cardboard tree forms to really make a variety of different sizes of trees. So it's a little mini forest. I ended up making 6 of these in total, which I will show you on my mantle when they're all done. But just cut that dowel down to size and then hot glue it onto the back of your cardboard tree form. Now it's time to start wrapping your yarn. So I start by wrapping vertically, and the hardest part is covering the tip of the tree. So put a little hot glue on the very tippy top of your tree form, and then wrap your yarn vertically, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times, however many times you need to get that tip covered. It's a little tricky, so take your time and maybe like hold the yarn in place, like pinch the yarn in place with your fingers, and then wrap vertically. And then once that part's done, it's easy peasy. You're just wrapping horizontally around and around and around at varying intervals and angles until you've covered all of the cardboard. I prefer to wrap like up and down, back and forth at different angles just to give more dimension and texture to the project as opposed to like just wrapping from top to bottom at the same angle. It would just kind of look, I don't know, kind of boring. So just keep wrapping and wrapping and wrapping until you have all of the cardboard covered. And then the only other part is making sure that you cover like the bottom piece of the cardboard. Like if these are going to be displayed up on a shelf or something, you want to make sure that the yarn is covering all the cardboard at the bottom. So use a little bit of hot glue and string the yarn back and forth over the bottom of the tree to cover up that cardboard. And that's too easy. And then just another option, another alternative method of doing this is adding like a little fringe at the bottom of your tree. So for this little green one, I wrapped yarn around 3 fingers and I made like a big loop bundle of yarn and then hot glue that to the back of the tree form at the bottom. So for this one, I had to do it 2 times. I had to make 2 little bundles of yarn and then proceed to wrap the tree the same way I did with the cream one. Just wrap everything, and then once all that cardboard is covered, you can go in and cut the loops, cut open the bottoms of the loops and trim that fringe so that it's even length all the way across. And then you just have a cute little fringe at the bottom of the Christmas tree. I just thought it was kind of like a fun little way to make each tree a little bit different and a little bit unique. Okay, and then finally you need to create a base for your tree. So you can use little mini wood rounds, 1.5-inch wood blocks work great for this. And to give a little bit more support where the wood dowel meets the base, I used wood beads. So hot glue a wood bead to the base and then add maybe another wood bead. You can do 1, you can do 2 or 3, and then pop the tree onto the wood base. And so then by hot gluing each wood bead together and the wood bead to the base, it kind of creates a more secure foundation so that you don't have that tiny little skinny dowel wobbling back and forth. And then finally, with my first 2 trees that I made, I used a really chunky textured, kind of almost multicolored yarn. If you're using a solid color yarn that doesn't have as much texture, consider maybe adding some ornaments or decorations. For these, I just used miniature wood beads and I hot glued them onto the tree and they look almost like little ornaments. But like I said, I made 6 trees in total and they're on my mantle this Christmas. I really love how all these turned out. I also added my rag garland to the mantle. Just because I do not have that picture hung up yet, it's a little lower. I didn't elevate the rag garland, I guess. I just left it plain. I think once I finally get this picture frame mounted, P.S. that picture is a print off Etsy. I will link to it. I'm in love with it. I think once that picture frame is mounted a little higher, I will go ahead and maybe add like a garland, a greenery garland, and then add the rag garland on top of it so there's a little bit more texture. But I think that might be a project for next year. I don't think I'll get around to it this season. And then here are my 3 Christmas trees, and I'll be sure to link to some of my DIY ornament projects and my DIY custom stockings in the comments below. But that's it. I think my living room is ready to go for the Christmas season. I do hope you enjoyed these 2 quick tutorials. Until next time, happy making.